Welcome to each and everyone present over here. It's the fifth day of this GST litigation course, and at the outset, I would request our secretary, Binay sir, to start with his welcome address.
Good afternoon, friends. Hope everyone is good. Uh, we at Huge Actions, we are inclined for the professional updates, and we are regularly conducting programs on various issues, including the income tax, GST, audit trail, and all others. This is our 10 days consecutive course, and this is only for the GST litigation. We are having many queries. We actually had many queries, and the people were asking how to deal with the matters when the litigations started. Then we are actually we started from the initial stage, how to deal with the matters, and we have 10 days consecutive course, and all over India, we have gathered good speakers. Today we have our own Sunil Gabawala ji, who was the ex-president of BCS. I remember my RRC at Agra. I think Mr. Gabawala ji was there as a president of BCS. So it is our uh, huge thing only that we have gathered people from all over India, and with all these, we welcome each and every participant herein, and we hope that everyone will be getting good knowledge and they will be in a better way to deal with the GST litigations. Uh, Thank you for this one.
Thank you so much, sir. Now, I would like to introduce the chairman for our session, Rohit Bhaiya. CA Rohit Surana has worked in DB Desai and Associates. He has co-chaired Indian Chamber of Commerce, Retail and Marketing Committee. He is the member of Confederation of Indian Industry MSME Committee, Kolkata. He has expertise in the field of investments in startups, mergers and acquisitions, corporate structuring, management, consultancy, and external CFO. He has expertise also in private equity. He has worked for 3 years in DB Desai and Associates. Uh, During the course of his career, he has handled clients like ACC, Gujarat, Ambuja, Berger Paints, Skipper Industries, Pogla Group, Cucina, Khadims. Also, he is attached to educational institutions as guest speaker. With these words, I welcome you, sir. Over to you, Sakshi.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Naveen. It's my great honor to introduce our speaker for today, CA Sunil Gabhawala, sir. We are extremely delighted to have you here, sir, and we expect to have a wonderful session with you. CA Sunil Gabhawala is a chartered accountant in practice with third rank at the All India level. He's also a cost accountant, and he has an excellent academic record with ranks throughout his career. He started his career in the indirect tax practice in the domain of sales tax law. And in the early days of his career, he helped his clients transition from the sales tax regime to the VAT regime. As a logical extension, he diversified into service tax practice. His comprehensive treatise on service tax, published by the Bharat Law House, saw 23 editions. Sir has been actively involved in the policy formulation process of GST and keenly follows the developments in this regard to the emerging law. His YouTube channel contains various videos on this topic and has garnered more than 60,000 views. He mentors a pan-India community of indirect tax professionals on the front of GST implementation. Throughout his professional career of more than 2 decades, Sir has led his firm to provide enhanced quality service offerings on the core principles of knowledge, integrity, and speed, leaving behind an indelible mark in each client interaction. His firm has been ranked as one of the top GST consultants for the years 2018 and 19 by the Insight Success magazine. Sir has delivered lectures on various topics of professional interests at various industry and trade bodies. He is a NACIN accredited trainer and regularly conducts training sessions for departmental officers. In the early days of his professional career, he also taught tax concepts to management students at NMIMS. He has also written various articles on various professional and business journals and is regularly quoted in newspapers on indirect tax related issues. Sir was the president of the Bombay Chartered Accountants Society for 2018-19 and is currently the chairman of the Indirect Tax Committee of the Society and is also a member of the study group constituted by Maharashtra government for implementing GST. Sir, it's an honor to have you here. Thank you so much for gracing us with your presence and we look forward to learning from you. Over to you, sir. Thank you.
Rohit Bhaiya, you can, take up the session in any way you want in connection with sir.
Sure.
मतलब आपको ना क्वेश्चन आंसर्स करना है, कैसे करना है, you can, all over to you now. Thank you.
Thank you. So, for the benefit of members, I'll take least time because Sunil sir is here and we all want to listen to him as much as possible. But just to set a preamble to the whole meeting, see, friends, there are basically and generally 3 stages of notices that we are facing. One is scrutiny notice, the other is demand notice, which is followed by pre-STN or a show cause notice. What leads to a scrutiny notice, what leads to a demand notice, and what ultimately culminates into a show cause notice is very important. For example, there is a mismatch in details of GSTR 1 and 3B. There will be a scrutiny notice. There's a difference between 2A, 2B, and 3B. There will be a scrutiny notice. There's a difference between the e-waybill that you have generated and the turnover that you have reported in GSTR 1. There will be a notice. So there are so many reasons of issuing a scrutiny notice. We all know financial year 2019-20 onwards, automated scrutiny issued by government, notably 185, etc., which tells how department can generate demand, etc. So these are the circumstances which are inherent to us in the sense the client, the assessee, and the practitioners who are filing GST returns in terms of what data they are giving, what data is getting reported to the department site, and their own automation, own intelligence, which works out the differences, and the notice is generated automatically whenever there is a difference. So that is the first stage. Then there could be inspections by department to your office premises, and they can gather various documents, data, evidence, which ultimately leads to issuance of a notice. Friends, at every stage, whether you're applying to an audit notice or to a scrutiny notice or to a show cause notice, which is basically the starting point of litigation, we all must keep certain important things in mind. Because litigation kitna chalega, kitna lamba chalega, डिपार्टमेंट कितना डिमांड डालेगी शो कॉज नोटिस में, ये हमारे हाथ में नहीं है. बट हमारे हाथ में ये है कि हाउ वी गैदर आवर डेटा. एंड टुडे इज अ वेरी गुड डे. सैटरडे जनरली नोटिसेस नहीं इशू होती, इसलिए इट्स अ वेरी नाइस डे टू डिस्कस अबाउट शो कॉज नोटिसेस. And who better than we have Sunil sir amongst us, who can guide us, through the pre-SCN and the post-SCN stage. And the most interesting part, my friends, would be that if we are listening to him very attentively, we also have good 15-20 minutes of question and answer, so that we can take the maximum use of him. And don't leave him. Ask him. Not taking any more time between you and the audience. Please start.
Thank you, Rohit, for a wonderful prelogue to the session. And I think you set the ball rolling and nicely summarized what is the expectations of the session today. And when I was looking at this 10-day litigation series, it is really a very interesting series because we are having 10 extended sessions covering each and every facet in the litigation space. And therefore, when I look at my session, which is somewhere exactly in the middle of the entire series, and I see some sessions which have happened and some which have to happen, and I looked at my session, what I could gather as an expectation was that this session is not expected to cover the technical merits, demerits of a particular point. There are special sessions which will deal with valuation related challenges, input credit related challenges, and things like that. The session today is also not geared up towards one type of a proceeding. Like, for example, there was somebody who has already dealt with appeal proceedings. There is somebody who has dealt with show cause notice related issues and things like that. The session, as I could decipher from the entire piece, is a sort of a catch-all type of a session, which would typically govern the entire litigation space. And that's where, when the chairman Rohit tried to set the ball, I think that preamble revalidates this thought process, that the idea of today's session is really not to tell you what to write, but how to write, how to draft a reply. I think that is what the entire session is all about. And my presentation, a brief presentation, is going to actually talk a little bit about practical experiences and some tips and tricks of how to deal with things, more than really a section or a case law or a issue driven approach. That's not what I've tried to do. Of course, in the question and answers, if we have some questions on that front, I would be more than happy to take those types of questions at that point of time. But I think it's a very important session. Many a times in a zeal to learn the law, we might forget the practice side of it. And that's where I think a session like this in a long series which we have makes a lot of sense. So, as rightly pointed out, the session for me is primarily drafting, but of course, somewhere whatever we will be talking about drafting will also apply to pleading in some way. So, drafting and pleading, the approach pre-show cause notice and post-show cause notice. It has been very categorically written that yes, we have to deal with both the situations. Means the entire life cycle, wherever there is a need for a drafting, what are the aspects which one should take care of when one looks at drafting. And that's where I think a 10-minute introductory part may not be out of place. And here what we try to do is we try to summarize the entire tax compliance regime into 4 broad baskets or 4 broad phases, which each law would have. The first phase, as we all know, is a phase of self-compliance, wherein the taxpayer, after having obtained his registration, collects taxes, pays taxes, and files returns as required. So this is a voluntary effort which is expected to be undertaken by the taxpayer on a periodic basis. If that doesn't happen, the second basket comes into place where there has to be some type of a policing, some manner in which the department can identify that, look, whether XYZ has correctly paid the taxes or has underpaid his taxes, or in the case of credits, it could be the other way around, overclaim the credits. So that would be the second stage where there would be some basis on which the department would try to collect information and build up a case. That phase we would say is a pre-adjudication phase, where prior to the show cause notice, there through various routes, and we'll go through each of those routes in a minute or two. And through various routes, the department tries to find out that, look, I find that there's one Mr. XYZ who has underpaid his taxes by 5 crores or has overclaimed his credit or refund by 2 crores. So the process of arriving at that would be the pre-show cause notice stage, which is the second basket. There are various ways in which one arrives at a tax officer arrives at that type of a conclusion. The third basket would be the process of actually determining whether the thought process of the tax officer that yes, perhaps this person has wrongly claimed an exemption, paid less tax, claimed more credit, that allegation, whether it is correct. And if the officer holds it to be correct, there has to be a dispute resolution, which is basically the litigation. As rightly pointed out, the show cause notice becomes the starting point of the litigation. The show cause will result into a confirmed demand at times, and thereafter there will be an appellate mechanism which will come into place. So that would be the third basket. And at any point of time, when the matter finally gets resolved, either by way of a finality from the highest forum or by way of the taxpayer accepting the contention and not filing further appeals, the demand becomes recoverable. And therefore, the last step which comes in is the recovery. So these are the four broad steps which one needs to bear in mind. And this slide will basically try to deal with all the sections and the procedures relating to that in a very concise manner. So as far as the self-assessment and compliance is concerned, we are aware that every time now transaction happens, there is an e-way bill compliance for goods. There is an e-invoice both for goods as well as services. So to a large extent, we have preponed the compliance requirement all the way up to the transaction itself. And that's what has led to a substantial increase in compliance and identifying issues at the at the starting stage. Thereafter, of course, we are aware we file a GSTR1, which is your statement of outward supplies. Then 20th, we pay the taxes and file a GSTR3B. And at the end of the year, you file an annual return, which consolidates all your turnover for the year, and which is then reconciled with your financial statements, which is GSTR99C. So this is what the taxpayer is expected to do. And if every taxpayer does everything correctly, at least from a perception of the tax officer, if everything is done correctly, then this phase itself should take care of it. But as we all know, there has to be policing, and that's where the second phase comes, which is the pre-adjudication phase. In the pre-adjudication phase, you will find that there are various different manners in which the department officer tries to collect data or intelligence about some wrongdoing. And the worst and the first and the most common way of doing it is scrutiny of returns. In the preamble, there was a bit of a discussion about this, that this is a step which is automated. And I think this word scrutiny of returns itself and the provisions also, when one goes through them, one finds out that this is just a prima facie review of what has been filed by the taxpayer. You have filed a GSTR1. The GSTR1 discloses a turnover of 10 crores. You then filed GSTR3B to pay the taxes, and you filed a turnover there of 8 crores. Clearly, there's a mismatch, and this discrepancy will result in a scrutiny notice, ASMT 10, as we are all aware, asking you to explain the difference. Of course, this is not a final activity because there could be reasons for differences. There could be old credit notes which have not been adjusted. You could have wrongly reported something in GSTR1 which you would be correcting in the subsequent month, etc., etc. So that's where, but because there is a difference between what you have stated in one document and what you have stated in another document, it leads to a primary thought process at the end of the officer or at the end of the system, to be more precise, that there is some error or there is some evasion. And therefore, we start with this process called scrutiny of returns, ASMT 10. Now, of course, recently, two more variations of this scrutiny have been introduced. One is what is known as difference in output tax liability, especially if there is a difference between GSTR 1 and 3B. Then there is a straight away a notice which will be issued in DRC 1C, and that notice you will be given 15-day time to respond. So that is one type of a notice which now comes automatically. Similarly, difference in input tax credit, if your credit claimed in 3B is substantially higher than the credit which appears in your 2B, then a notice comes in DRC for a difference in ITC as well. Both of these are very specific variations to the ASMT 10, which have been recently introduced. So you have these three types of notices, which are primarily based only on data submitted by you. I am aware that in various states, the scrutiny notices cover many other things which can be questioned. And many a times they ask you for details of your sales register, purchase register, or many things they ask, which is not apparently available from the returns. According to me, those types of things which requires a prolonged discussion, prolonged call of data, all of that cannot be a part of scrutiny. It will have to be a part of some other process as we move ahead. But yes, we are seeing some jurisdictions where these types of things are happening, where the authorities also somewhere overpower their exceed their jurisdiction and try to ask for data or undertake actions or propose actions which are not within the scope of that specific type of the activity. So that is scrutiny. Thereafter, we have assessments, which basically would be base judgment assessments if you fail to file returns. Or in case of an unregistered dealer, again, a base judgment assessment can be undertaken, or registration can be thrust upon you and an assessment can happen. These are not very commonplace. Of course, scrutiny is a very commonplace type of a thing. Scrutiny, as we said, was typically based on data which you have submitted. As compared to that, there is a department audit, section 65 ADT 1, we are all aware about. And this process basically would be a detailed process where there will be an examination of your records, all the books of accounts, invoices, and your financial statements, and there would be a reconciliation at that stage. And that is the scope of department audit, a prolonged process. Again, ADT 1 resulting into various queries being raised, data being taken by the department, ultimately resulting in an observation sheet known as ADT 02. If you comply with that observation sheet, and pay the taxes matter ends there. Otherwise, this again becomes a raw material for the third step, which is adjudication. Just like scrutiny of returns, moment you give an explanation, if it is found satisfactory, it is fine. If it is not found satisfactory, it takes the entire position into the next third basket, which we'll be talking about, which is the adjudication basket. The third way, there would be people who would, file returns. They would not, there would be transactions which are not shown in the returns, not shown in the books as well. If there are transactions in the returns but not in books, department audit will find it. But if there are transactions which are outside the books, and we all understand what it means, how does the department unearth that? And that is where we have provisions which talk about inspection, search, and if required, then a seizure of various documents and goods. It's a detailed process. INS 1 is the starting point of that process, and of course, a fairly long and a painful process. The objective of this is typically to unearth transactions which are not coming in the normal formal chain of activities. And of course, fake invoicing and all is something which is always their trigger point. Circular trading, fake invoicing, accommodation bills, all of that is something which is at times a major focus area of the inspection, search, and seizure processes. There could be e-way bill interception when the goods are in transit. The e-way bill is not compliant, then again there could be a penalty which can be initiated at that process. So that is also one mechanism in which there is an inspection. And finally, in many cases where there is a conceptual issue, especially industry-wide issue, the department might issue you a summons, take data, collect data based on summons, and based on that data build up a case. Now, friends, if you look at all these different baskets of pre-adjudication, what you will find is there are different routes in each of these, but the end objective of each of these routes is collection of information and building up the case by the tax officer. None of these cases is a conclusive case that you have to end up paying. It is just a prima facie thought process that yes, there could be some challenge. I have some doubt in my mind as a tax officer, and therefore I want information to validate. I might be wrong as a tax officer. I will just want to check whether you are paying taxes correctly or not. If you are paying taxes correctly, this process ends here. If they find that there is some gap, then naturally it will go to the next stage. The next stage, as we all know, is the litigation process, start of the litigation process. There is something called as a pre-show cause notice, which is a DRC 1A, which gives the taxpayer one more option, one more opportunity to present his case in a correct manner. Thereafter comes the show cause notice. And this, friends, is the most important phase in this entire presentation. Understanding the importance and the gravity of the show cause notice. All the roads up to now lead to the show cause notice. And once the show cause notice is issued, the litigation starts. The foundation of the entire litigation is the show cause notice. And once the show cause notice is issued, the department cannot expand the scope of that show cause notice. So, for example, if a show cause notice is issued for 50 lakhs, and later on, there appears that it should not have been 50 lakhs but 70 lakhs, the demand cannot be confirmed of 70 lakhs. 50 lakhs becomes the outer boundary, the upper cap. And it's not only in terms of the amounts that the show cause notice creates the boundaries. The boundaries are also created in terms of allegations. In the service tax regime, excise regime, we have lots of decisions, including the Supreme Court decisions, which says that if the allegation in the show cause notice is X, and based on that X allegation, if a demand is sought to be created, later on it is found that no, the X allegation is incorrect. But there is some other possible allegation, Y allegation. It is not possible to substitute the X allegation to Y allegation, and the department will have to restrict itself to X allegation, and the taxpayer will have to defend that X allegation. To give you a very simplistic type of scenario, let us say there is a situation where someone has collected some tax and he has claimed an exemption in the return. And of course, this is inadvertent and incorrect. And the show cause notice is issued alleging only that the exemption is not available. But there is no allegation about a wrongful collection of tax. In this type of a situation, it's only if the taxpayer is able to defend the exemption well. The department cannot come back and say that, okay, even though there was an exemption, you have collected the tax, so please pay me. For that, a separate allegation will be required. And therefore, show cause notice becomes a very important document in the entire process. Post the show cause notice, we are aware that there is a reply to the show cause notice filed by the taxpayer. There's a hearing granted. And thereafter, after the hearing is granted, there's an adjudication order. The show cause notice and steps thereafter, each of them have to follow the principles of natural justice. There has to be a reasoned order. Each of the allegations raised in the show cause notice should be replied. And basis the reply which you are filing, the adjudication order has to either accept your allegation, accept your defenses, or provide reasons for not accepting those defenses. Thereafter, there's a first appellate authority. We are aware of the pre-deposit requirements and the fact that it's a time-bound mechanism. Thereafter, there's an appeal to the tribunal, which is still to be set up. And finally, you have appeals to the High Court and the Supreme Court. And at any point of time, if the taxpayer chooses to accept the department version by not litigating ahead, the demand becomes confirmed demand. In case of confirmed demand, the said demand can be recovered. And that's the last step, wherein you have initiation of recovery proceedings and then a recovery of tax. It could be by attaching your bank account, it could be by reaching out to your debtors, it could be by attaching your property. Different modes of recovery have been prescribed under the law. Of course, if you are in a cash flow difficulty, you can request for payment of tax in installments to your commissioner. There is a provisional attachment of bank account, which we just talked about. If there's an electronic credit ledger balance, they could block that balance. And in certain situations, there could be a power to arrest the defaulting taxpayer also. So this, friends, is a broad macro view of the entire proceedings or the provisions in the law and the manner in which it would happen. Before we really go into the real content of today's session, where we will be talking about how to draft certain responses to notices, please understand notices can come at various juncture, and many a times we use the word notices very loosely. Even many a times a letter requesting for information, the taxpayer will come back and tell you that, look, I've got a notice. At the most, it might be just a letter requesting for an information. So I would also not restrict today's discussion only to a show cause notice response, though we'll be talking a little bit more in detail about it. But we would be talking about general strategies about replying to various types of inquiry letters or communications which keep on coming from time to time. A couple of points which we need to bear in mind. The first point is that each of these steps are sequential. Ideally, you will have a self-assessment and a compliance, followed by something from the pre-adjudication stage. After the pre-adjudication stage and the quantification is done, there will be an adjudication and an appellate proceedings, and thereafter there will be recovery procedures. While I am saying this, I am aware that at times the department acts overzealous, and many a times, even at the stage of the summons, they try to envisage a bank attachment or a recovery proceedings are being initiated. All of those, of course, in specific type of situations, a provisional attachment may be warranted. But in many of those situations, you find that the courts have come to the rescue of the taxpayer. If you take the matter to the court, it's clearly an abuse of power. In the absence of a confirmed demand, the recovery proceedings cannot start, and it's a settled proposition of law that recovery is always subsequent to an adjudication. In many cases, we also find that in the pre-adjudication stage, there is a presumption of a guilt or a force on the taxpayer to accept a guilt or a wrongdoing. Again, this is something which is not in the settled proposition of the legal parlance. It's, I think, a very trite law that a person cannot be expected to confess any of his wrongdoings, and he cannot be asked to sit in judgment of his own affairs. Therefore, many a times when there's a summons, they would say that, okay, you agree to reverse the credit yourself. Whether to agree or not, that's a commercial call, that's a business related call which that taxpayer will have to take. But on a legal footing, definitely it's in the rights of the taxpayer to say that we will not comply with this. Please issue me a show cause notice. Please build up a proper case against me. Please give me an opportunity to defend. I think that is one more aspect which we need to bear in mind. And the third aspect which we need to bear in mind is, as far as pre-adjudication is concerned, we many a times find a substantial overlap in the activities. You find that there will be an ASMT 10 issued, and along with that, an ADT 1 is also issued. And many a times in the summons proceedings also, you are talked about to bring a 2A, 3B reconciliation. And therefore, there is a lot of duplication of proceedings. Now, if you really read the provisions, you will find that each of the provisions has a separate objective. The scrutiny of returns, as we said, is the objective of scrutiny of returns is to find out prima facie errors. As compared to that, the department audit is expected to find out the differences between your returns and your financials. And anything which is outside the financials is a subject matter of inspection, search, or seizure. Summons, of course, can be issued in case of interpretation issues, and that is where typically it is being issued. So these are the broad areas, and definitely if there is a lot of overlap or transgressing, at an appropriate time, the taxpayer or the consultant can rake up these issues depending on the stakes involved and depending on the merits and the demerits of each case. So I think that is what I felt would be a starting point. With that background, let us go to the different facets of drafting and pleading. And this is where, again, we find that there is a lot of unstructured activity happening from the department end. Ideally, one would expect a structured approach wherein the department would issue a notice on the portal, and there will be a response to that letter or the notice on the portal. And accordingly, of course, there will be a personal hearing available, which as of today is a face-to-face meeting. And it's not an anonymous, unlike the income tax where there is a faceless assessment. We still have not reached that stage of faceless assessment. It is a face-to-face meeting, either a physical meeting or a virtual call, a virtual conference like the one which we are having right now. But there's a defined officer, and jurisdiction under GST has a lot of importance. As we move ahead, we'll be talking about it. But what we are actually seeing is there are the means of communication. While there is a stipulation that it should be portal driven, there has to be a DIN number on it, there has to be a state related ARN number on it. But we find that many a times the department officers do not follow it. They might send you emails, they might send you some notice on WhatsApp. The service of the notice may not at times happen by on the portal, but either through email or through WhatsApp. Many a times there is just a telephonic communication that please come tomorrow and bring this data. Now, in these types of things, necessarily as a taxpayer or as a consultant, we will have to build up a strategy of how do we want to deal with it. Because many a times there are not only requests for data which is oral, but especially in case of anti-evasion or DGGI investigations, even allegations are oral. And at times when you start drafting and giving them responses, it's basically a one-way street. And that's what many a times as consultants or taxpayers, we face a challenge that there's nothing as a background, as a context in which we are going to respond to him. So a generic strategy which we follow in our firm is like to like, which means if there's an oral communication, the response will be oral. If there's a written communication, the response will be written. Also, in case of oral communications, depending on the stage of maturity of the matter, we might at times either ignore those oral communications, or we may request the officer that in view of the organizational constraints, we will not be able to communicate to oral communications. We will need something in writing to respond to the data request. Of course, at times there's a big fat ego at the end of the department officer. So we have to be a bit careful about this facet, and we have to be humble but assertive in deciding the appropriate mechanism of a response. Many a times when you are responding, you will find that the letters which come to you may be in English. Sometimes their English itself is not decipherable. That's another challenge which at times we face. But keeping that aside, we found situations where the communication is in local languages or in Hindi. And then at times there are lots of challenges in responding to these types of communications. I think the first thing which we will have to do in case of a non-English language notice or a letter is to get it translated to English. maybe by a professional. Many a times if it's Hindi, we may understand it, but there might be some knowledge gap. So it may be appropriate that the notice gets translated into English by an appropriate person who is an expert in the field. And after translation, we respond to that. And that translated notice is also attached as a response to the notice. Many a times there is a thought process that should we respond in that language itself if we are comfortable to do that. My answer would be no, we should prefer the English language, because assuming that this is a starting of a litigation or the root of the litigation, we would at any point want to approach the courts, and then we approach the courts having a communication in another language. There will be an entire process of converting and translating and certifying that translated content, and all of that can be avoided. Not talking even about the fact that the natural flair of drafting will come in English as compared to the local languages, and therefore it would be more appropriate to respond to notices in English, irrespective of whether the notice has been received in a local language or in Hindi or in English. So that is how I would like to look at that facet. The second and the third facets are a little bit of a strategic decision, and I am aware that there is no correct answer to any of these questions. One question which always comes up is, sir, should I draft a short reply just to the point? If the tax officer is asking me 3 things, should I just reply to 3 things, or should I give a background? Should I write something which I think the officer might be asking, and accordingly build up a defense? So the question basically is, should your reply be elaborate? Should it be that, okay, if I write a 20-page reply, it will be more taken into account as compared to a 2-page reply? The answer to that is, the size of the reply does not really matter. Whether to go elaborate or concise is each individual's style. But many a times, if you are wanting to be elaborate, you have to make sure that when you are becoming elaborate and making a very long reply, you should not mix up facts, you should not bring out irrelevant facts, or you should not write something which might work against you at a future point of time. And therefore, I would lean more towards the concise mechanism, but elaborate but concise. In the sense, all the points should get covered, but each point should be to the point and not unnecessarily rambled around again and again. One more method is, at the initial stages, whether your reply should be submissive or aggressive. Should you bring out all the technical defects? Should you bring out the authority, lack of authority of the tax officer? Or should you be just submitting information and leave it at an appropriate juncture to bring out the legal and the jurisdictional arguments? Again, there could be a balance which might be required in this type of a process. Both of them at times might work. A mix of both may also work. A basic structure of your reply definitely would have some items which we need to be very categorical about or clear about. Of course, the person who is replying to the letter or the notice, so either it's on their letterhead or you put his name, address, etc. If it's a third party replying on behalf of someone else, many times consultants reply on behalf of the taxpayer, it should mention that it is under the authority and instructions of the client that you are replying to it, and preferably attach the authorization which you have got for that. It should be dated. Many times the government letters are not dated, especially if they are not served on the portal. But when you are responding, please make sure that there is a proper trail which is being created. There is a date. There has to be a proper person to whom it is addressed. Many a times you might want to mark it as a copy to people, so put that. Explain the context and the purpose. You might want to write that you have received this letter or an email or a WhatsApp message and requiring you to submit this many things, or this is the purpose of this reply. Why are you writing this answer or a communication? Thereafter, bring out the facts and the information relevant to this purpose or the query. If there is a show cause notice, then you might need to bring out grounds raising a defense. And thereafter, maybe you'll bring in a prayer or a call for action. At the end, I'm aware that each reply should always volunteer for any further information as and when required and called for. These are small steps which will be very useful when you are going into a litigation, because many a times we see that when the matter goes to the litigation forum, there is not enough work done at a ground level, and that's what creates difficulties. So therefore, I think these facets become very important. each document which you are submitting should have these 4 or 5 broad contents. At the same time, whenever you sign off any document, look at it from two perspectives: completeness and brevity, which is exactly the point which we discussed in the earlier slide. It has to be complete, bringing out all the information which is required. At the same time, it should not be rambling around. And what is also important is that the draft should have a soul, because each document, and the best way to look at a draft is to read the draft in the absence of the person who is drafting. A letter, if read in the absence of the draftsman of the letter, should be understandable. If there is a doubt after reading that letter, then many a times what happens is the draftsman wanted to write something, but when he wrote, he forgot to write it, or he wrote it in a different manner, and therefore the meaning is not conveyed. And therefore there has to be a flow and a soul of that document, which is very important. And an interesting way to highlight or identify that flow or soul is to make your reply or every document mutually exclusive, cumulatively exhaustive. Now, what this means is that whenever you are looking at any flow of idea or activity, group those ideas or activities into some large bullet points. All those bullet points should be mutually exclusive to each other, and they should not overlap with each other. And at the same time, the total of all of that should convey the entire message. So that is a concept which typically is coming out in a book called McKinsey Way of Doing Things. And it's a very nice book for understanding the entire presentation and the drafting concept. So I think it's a good method in which one can like to look at your drafts. Now, when you're drafting something, I think these three things are basic, but at the same time, we are seeing many cases where we see challenges over there. And that's where command over language becomes very important. You need to have a reasonable grip over the English grammar. You need to have a diverse vocabulary. It may not be fluorescent like a Sarshiro, but at the same time, you should have variety of words. It should avoid monotony of words. And at the same time, the syntax and the style of writing, all those three things become very relevant. When we are looking at grammar, understanding the parts of speech and their relevance, many a times we are used to using adjectives and adverbs, a very liberal dose of those adjectives and adverbs. Question each adjective and adverb, because adjectives and adverbs many a times bring in a lot of subjectivity, and the entire process of litigation is more objective. So someone might write, the taxpayer is very compliant in his day-to-day activities. Now, what do you mean by very compliant in his day-to-day activities? It doesn't leave any sense. There has to be an objectivity. It is a very subjective sentence. So if you want to build up a case saying that, look, there was no intention to evade, and therefore you want to bring about his compliance activities, an appropriate manner would be to give him a chart of the compliances which you have voluntarily undertaken. But yourself trying to judge that you are not non-compliant may not be the correct way. And that's where in many places you find adjectives, adverbs being used very frequently. Maybe they could be avoided as far as possible. Use of articles A and the, each of them has a different meaning. Courts have held that we are aware of. The third part is very important. While a liberal English language would suggest use of active language, and that's what is more direct rather than a passive language, when you are replying to a show cause notice or such legal documents, and many a times passive language may be useful, because in a passive language, you are at times able to drop the subject. So for example, if you want to say the officer has erred in issuing a notice, this is a active sentence. The same thing could be said by saying the notice has been erroneously issued. Now here you are not directly pinpointing an officer, though you are giving the same message. And therefore, while there is a big school of thought to suggest that an active voice is much easier to understand and is more direct, for litigation related matters, perhaps at times a passive voice may be a more appropriate manner of dealing with things. A tense agreement, we are seeing many places where we see a mix and match of past, present, and future. Most of the responses would be dealing with the matters of the past, and therefore should be appropriately addressed in terms of the drafting of the entire reply. Sentence structure, we are aware: subject, verb, object, Many a times there are incomplete sentences, there are long sentences at times. Sometimes you find that there are 7, 8 lines which go into a single sentence. I don't think that is a correct way, because in that context, we might lose the entire flow of that entire discussion or the subject of the discussion. Phrases, clauses, depending on the Latin, including Latin maxims which might be used, all of that is important. Punctuations, and more importantly, many a times, what you are writing is an ambassador of your quality. And therefore, it's important that you spell check, you do a grammar check. There are so many online tools available now that before you send out a documentation or a communication as a consultant, all of this is taken care of. This, I think we've talked about vocabulary, syntax and style. Now, when you're looking at most of the things being in a computer, Microsoft Word, being printed, see there's a lot of overdose of fonts. Typically, each document should be made of one font. If you are using a second font, there has to be a strong reason for bringing in a second font. Of course, emphasis, de-emphasis can be brought in through different methods, but there's no need to change the font. At times, you might want to have a smaller font size for reproduction of content and things like that. That's a personal preference which one may like to do. Justification, typically there are, as we are aware that, there can be a right justification or a aligned justification, and you may choose either of them. Each paragraph should start from the same place. It couldn't be scattered around here or there. Numbering, continuous numbering if you are using them. Similar type of spacing, 1.5 spacing is generally treated as a standard one, but you may choose your own. But whatever you choose, please keep it consistent throughout the document. Use of bold, underline, italics, all caps is as good as shouting, so you have to be very careful where you use all caps. A bold is where you want an emphasis on a particular thing. Italics is typically reserved for reproduction. Underline and bold are used for emphasis. Bold is typically used more for titling. Use of exhibits, annexures, consistency of those uses is very important. If you are using some short forms, if they are not commonly used short forms, you might need to give a glossary. And if you are quoting some sections, there has to be a mechanism where there's a consistency in the way you quote the sections, dates, citations, etc. So I think that is as far as the consistency is concerned. Now, with that little bit of a background, not from a GST perspective, we now go to a typical approach, having understood that this is something which is the bare minimum foundation which we have to create. We now go into understanding how are we going to respond to the various letters or notices. And as I said, the approach fundamentally might change in a pre-show cause drafting and a post-show cause drafting. And I think the fundamental difference comes from the fact that the show cause notice is the foundation of litigation and it defines the boundaries. And a common mistake which we see many a times is that in pre-show cause notice, not proper facts are let out. And that is what I feel is more important. In a pre-show cause notice, there is, as consultants, many a times we overthink. And therefore, when the first letter comes asking you to provide, let us say, the purchase register, we straight away start thinking, okay, now this person would be wanting matching. He would be wanting to do 2A, 3B, and then he would raise demands for mismatch. And then I see people writing replies, quoting all the legal provisions, saying that there is this high court decision which says that you have to collect the tax from the supplier and things like that. Friends, I think that's an overdose of legal activity, legal submissions. On the legal front, the letter is merely asking you for, let us say, a reconciliation between your GSTR 2A and GSTR 3B, or maybe is demanding a purchase register. So at that stage, we did not overthink. I am aware that in 99% of the cases, you will reach that stage. But that does not mean that in the first reply, you will give all of that. In the first letter, pre-show cause notice, whichever type of a letter, summons, whatever comes, I think the priority of the taxpayer and the consultant should be really to respond to what is asked for and to establish relevant facts for whatever is the perceived issue. Most of the times it's a perceived issue. Sometimes it is communicated orally. Sometimes it is communicated in writing. So depending on the issue communication, you will decide on the response to the issue in terms of legality. But primarily what is important is you bring out relevant facts. And when you are bringing out relevant facts, what are those relevant facts which you need to bring out in your reply? Firstly is a little bit about the entity. What is the entity? What is the constitution of the entity? Is it a public listed company? Is it a private company? Is it a partnership firm? Does the government have any stake in it? Is there some government funding? Is there some bank funding? Some of those factors may be relevant to the issue. Now, when you are bringing these out, also make sure that look at it from a binocular of relevance. We don't want to unnecessarily just make a 3-pager about us type of a story in the entity related facts, but certain facts may be relevant. For example, if the company was a excise registered entity and 20 years it was doing excise and thereafter it has been transitioned to GST, and in excise there was a particular classification. In GST, now they are looking at perhaps changing that classification. The fact that for 20 years in excise you had that classification and the HSN primarily continues in the same manner may be relevant. And therefore, you may want to bring that history of that entity being incorporated in 1980s, setting up a factory, there is setting up 3 factories, all of them clearing goods on that HSN. Depending on the fact matrix, you may want to bring a little bit about a flavor of the entity in the facts. Also bring out the facts relating to voluntary compliances. The fact that you are obtained registration voluntarily, you are paying taxes voluntarily. Maybe bring out a chart, more or less today these charts are available in the portal itself. So bring that out to the extent relevant to the issue. And what we are trying to basically do is we are building up the fact matrix to establish that this taxpayer is generally compliant. Thereafter, relevant to the issue, you may need to explain the nature of the business. Now, many a times the tax officer, the department may look at business facts in a very convoluted manner. In most of the businesses, there are multiple stakeholders. In income tax, typically you just look at your income, expenditure and net it out and pay the taxes. And therefore, it presents a limited challenge. The nuances of a business present limited challenge. But when it comes to GST, GST is payable on the gross transaction value and it depends on contracts. Now, typically, you might have a contract with X, but the beneficiary of the goods or the services might be Y. Payment might come from Z. Now, all these factors sometimes result in a myopic or a colored view by the tax officer. It's therefore important that you bring out your business facts correctly. For example, when you look at freight, ocean freight, and this has been a very common issue in service tax as well as in GST, that typically there is a freight aggregator or a freight forwarder who will buy freight from a shipping line, add his own margin and sell freight to a exporter. And there have been lots of notices issued to say that the difference between these two is merely an agency commission and please pay a service tax in the earlier regime and now GST on the difference. Notwithstanding the fact that ocean freight all the way up to 22 was exempted from the payment of GST and earlier service tax. Now, in these types of situations, it's very important that you bring out the nature of the business. In the legal arguments, you will be writing that, look, I am not an agent, I am a principal to principal trader. But in your preamble, in the facts, you need to bring out that, look, these are the circumstances, these are the facts of the business, this is how generally the business is carried out. Maybe you might want to bring in the FIMDA regulations, which talk about the contracting carrier and the performing carrier, the distinction between the two, how the businesses are organized, why is it organized in that manner. Those types of facts which might be relevant to the issue under consideration should be elaborately brought about. Is the second aspect which we talk about. Of course, the data and the documents, information which is called about in the notice will always have to be submitted. If certain data is time consuming to calculate or prepare, you might seek additional time for data which is not submitted. And finally, you'll have to volunteer to provide more information as and when needed, so that it does not suggest that you are trying to shirk the inquiry or trying to avoid the litigation or the queries. So that is as far as the facts is concerned. And I think this is something which most of the time we should be concentrating on in the pre-show cause notice response. In many of the written documents, we find that the department does not raise any claims. It does not say that, look, you are treating a particular thing as exempted, but according to me, it's taxable. All of that at times is made orally. If the claim is made orally, in that case, I would believe that we should very briefly, again, depending on the type of the situation, we may choose how we want to deal with it, but very briefly summarize the issue as we understand based on the personal interaction, seek revalidation. And maybe it's because what happens many a times, it's common for a tax officer to turn around and say that, no, this was not what I was saying. And therefore, we have to be very careful. As far as possible, oral claims avoidable. We should request the tax officer to please put it down on a piece of paper, either by way of a show cause or by way of a letter, and then respond to it. But if he forces you that, okay, you reply, otherwise we'll attach the bank account, we will unnecessarily keep on issuing summons and things like that, then maybe what we can do is, we should very briefly summarize the issue, refer to the personal interaction based on which we understood the issue from you to be like this, and then seek a revalidation that if our understanding of the issue is incorrect, please let us know immediately. Then build upon the facts which have been talked about earlier. Many a times it might be a reconciliation or a documentation issue. So build on those reconciliation and documentation. Do not go too much into elaborate legal provisions. For example, if there is some amount, let's say some amount which is written back in the books of accounts, and the department wants to say that this is liable for GST. You may just want to say that according to us, there is no GST payable because this is not a supply attracting GST. You need not go into a very elaborate answering of the circulars, notifications, old case laws. At this stage, it is a bit premature. And of course, at the end, there should be a request for an appropriate framing of an issue and request for an issuance of a show cause notice, beyond which we will always have to give the detailed legal arguments. So at this stage, a limited reference to the legal provisions, a heavy concentration on facts is the approach which one will look at. Many a times, the department goes even more aggressive, especially the investigation teams. They might force you to reverse credits under protest. They might force you to make payments. They may not even permit you to do it under protest. They might just put a sort of a hanging sword. There are fears being created of arrest. At times, there are fears of bank attachment or newspaper publicity. And many a times, for business reasons, the company or the taxpayer might agree to succumb to these types of pressures and may choose to make a payment under protest. Now, if you are making a payment under protest, despite no legal claim from the department, no written show cause notice, then I would believe you should write a proper elaborate letter, briefly summarizing the issue like what we discussed in the earlier slide, refer to the personal interaction, concentrate on facts, and then while making a passing reference to the legal provisions and the arguments, mention that we do not agree with the stand that there is a supply, but to buy peace, we are paying this tax under protest and we reserve our right to claim a refund. At this juncture, again, you might need to strategize whether you want to pay through DRC3 or GSTR 3B, because if you pay through 3B, you will be reporting this in GSTR 1 as a debit note or a tax invoice, enabling the credit change. But if you pay through a DRC3, the credit is lost for the subsequent buyer. So therefore, it's a strategic call again, which you will have to take, that whether you would want to pay through a GSTR 3B or a DRC3 challan. Thereafter, you should enclose the proof of payment along with the working of the payment. Again, the working should clearly mention that this is notwithstanding our argument that the tax is not payable and this is without prejudice. And that letter again should end with a request for appropriate framing of the issue. Presumably, the show cause notice will be issued in some time frame. If it is not issued, then file a refund application, and then the refund application will prompt a show cause notice, resulting in further litigation and the resolution of the issue. So that is as far as the pre-show cause notice is concerned. This is how I would believe one will have to deal with the situation at hand. Once a show cause notice is issued, and this, according to me, is the key objective whenever an investigation starts, because once the show cause notice is issued, it becomes a foundation of the entire future proceedings, and therefore it is a very important step in the entire process. Now, once this show cause notice is issued, typically they give you 30 days time to respond to the show cause notices, and you can seek some additional time, which is within a reasonable time frame. Keeping in mind that now there is an outer time frame for passing the adjudication order, the department may not be willing to sleep over the show cause notice or grant you long adjournments or extensions. So we have to be nimble-footed as far as the show cause notice response is concerned. Now, if pre-show cause notice, the fact matrix has been very nicely taken up, the life post-show cause notice becomes much easier, because in the show cause notice, in the reply to the show cause notice, that is your first comprehensive opportunity to make various submissions and lead evidences. And therefore, it is important that the post show cause notice reply has facts in extreme detail. If each and every relevant fact should come out in the reply. Present a proper chronology of events, what led to the show cause notice. Many a times that table of dates and the events will help in highlighting the entire situation. Lead various evidences. Now, this is very important because post the adjudication, any evidence submitted at the appellate forum will be treated as an additional evidence. And at that stage, you will be required to establish to the appellate authority why this evidence was not submitted at a ground level. Therefore, wherever possible, please lead evidences. Wherever you are seeking time, especially for example, if it's a vendor certificate for input tax credit claim, and it will take time. In the reply, attach whatever is available and specifically seek an extension of time on, and if possible, give a reason for seeking that extension of time. That if let's say if that particular vendor is not available or is traveling, put those types of reasons, or sometimes it's a complex organization. So at least get a letter from them saying that we will need 15 days to give you this certificate. And then put that letter into this communication saying that because of this, we need this time. And that would help you at an appellate forum wherever there's a challenge of additional evidence, we can bring that out. At the show cause stage, of course, reading of the show cause is very important and various grounds will come in. But the show cause notice at times relies upon various documents. And if those documents have not been served on you, naturally you will have to request for those relied upon documents. If there are certain statements of third parties used against you, you may choose a cross-examination. If you have put some statement and you feel that it is incorrect, you may want to retract on that statement. That may also come up as a part of the response to the show cause notice. Thereafter, there will be grounds on merits. And here we have to be careful to mention that each of those grounds are alternative to each other. And notwithstanding the basic ground that the no tax is due or all payments have been correctly done, alternative reliefs can be demanded. And thereafter, there's a request for personal hearing and a prayer and a call for action. So this is what typically would be your response post show cause notice, a very elaborate reply covering various facets. And friends, at this juncture, it's important for me to stress the importance of validity of the show cause notice. And as you are aware, the CGST law has a provision which says that any technical defect relating to the service of the notice has to be raised at the first juncture itself. If it is not raised, that it is validly served. So therefore, the challenging of validity of the show cause notice becomes very important. And the way the law is drafted and the way it is implemented, we can see there are many reasons or grounds for challenging the validity of the show cause notice. And this becomes very important because in many cases, merits may be secondary. At court level, the courts might be more inclined to look at these types of facets also. And if they find that there is something gross abuse done, maybe on these grounds itself, the show cause or the order can be quashed by the higher authorities. And therefore, I think all these grounds should be brought about the challenges to the validity of the show cause notice. And here I will spend a few minutes explaining some of these grounds because these are very technical grounds, but very important grounds. And I think the first ground is going to be about a jurisdiction. Now, the way the GST law is drafted, you will find that Section 73 notice is to be issued by a proper officer. Under the customs law, the concept of the proper officer and its interpretation and the authority of people to issue show cause notices was a subject matter of challenge. And very recently, the Supreme Court had taken a position that a proper officer is a officer who is authorized to issue a show cause notice. Now, any random department employee of a GST department cannot issue a notice. Same way, when you are looking at jurisdiction for the issuance of the notice, the proper officer, the concept of proper officer is defined. And therefore, what is important is the person who is defined as the proper officer, there has to be a notification to that effect. Now, if you look at the entire law, the way it is drafted, you have section 73, which says a proper officer. You have a circular issued by the CBIC, which defines the territorial jurisdiction and the monetary limits of the various authorities. This circular is very much in place. But the question which one will have to examine is whether a circular can authorize an officer, or whether a proper officer has to be authorized through a notification. And this is something which is clearly a legal issue, and it will take time for the courts to, give some judgment on this point. But yes, there is the way the notices are being issued. I understand some of the states have issued notifications to authorize their officers as proper officers, but the center has not issued. So if it's a central notice issued by a central tax authority, definitely this could be one of the grounds which should be raised. Maybe in a personal hearing, you may not want to stress it too much, but it should definitely become a part of the response to the show cause notice. The authority of the person to issue a show cause notice should be questioned. This question will be, of course, firstly on the basic power to issue the notice. Secondly, many a times we say the monetary jurisdiction is not being satisfied. A notice which has to be issued by an additional commissioner is issued by an assistant commissioner. We have judgments which say that this is clearly incorrect and the notice will be quashed ab initio in those types of situations. Many a times the notice is issued by the central authority, but you are allotted to the state authority. In this situation also, there is a challenge because the notice has to be answerable. The adjudication has to be done by the person under whose jurisdiction you are located. So all those types of points can be raised as far as the validity of the show cause notice is concerned. The scope of coverage, again, depending, as I highlighted, that scrutiny has a limited scope of coverage. Now, within the ASMT 10 notice, if the person is expecting or questioning a classification, clearly it's a subject matter of a challenge. So naturally, we should bring that out. Manner of service, we are aware there are decisions which say that the notice has to be served on the common portal. A notice which is not served on a common portal will not be a valid notice. It has to be containing the DIN number. All those factors I think we can bring about as technical points. Many a times the show cause notice proceeds on fundamentally incorrect facts. So while in the main reply to the show cause notice, you will be highlighting the incorrectness and bringing in the correct facts. The facet that the entire notice has proceeded on incorrect facts makes the entire show cause notice incorrect and liable to be quashed. Non-invocation of key provisions, many a times, especially the state notices, don't put the taxpayer to a proper cause. There's a proper format in which a show cause notice has to be issued. And if that is not done, all of this should be challenges which come in. Now, the next couple of points are very interesting. The show cause notice should not be predetermining an issue. At the same time, it should not be ambiguous in nature. So it's a very tightrope walk which the tax officer has to do. He cannot be very casual in saying that, look, according to me, there's a supply, so please pay the tax. At the same time, he cannot conclude that there is a supply. He has to allege a supply, because the conclusion will happen at the next stage, which is the adjudication stage. So if the reading of the show cause notice leads us to a conclusion that it is a predetermined, the way it is written, it clearly says that you have to pay the tax. That's it. If that be the case, then it is a predetermined show cause notice, and such predetermined show cause notice are also liable to be quashed. Non-reasoned show cause notice, not giving reasons why he believes something to be true. I think that is again a very important reason which can be used as a ground to challenge the show cause notice. Most of the notices which in the service tax regime we had, that ITR versus ST3 notices, these are all non-reasoned notices. Same way, based on presumptions. Today you have a notice which straight away starts by saying GSTR 2A shows a value of 50 lakhs. GSTR 3B you have claimed 1 crore, therefore 50 lakhs is unmatched. and tax not paid, and therefore please reverse the input tax credit. This notice is clearly based on presumptions, because there's a presumption that 2A is correct. There's a presumption that 3B is timed. There are timing differences, as we all are aware about. There could be various reasons why the vendor may not have uploaded in my 2A, but the tax could have been paid. So therefore, the show cause notice has to go transaction specific. It has to list down the items of the transactions. It has to say that, look, there is one Mr. X who raised an invoice of 5 lakhs on you, and you claimed the credit, and that Mr. X has not paid the tax. The notice has to go into all of these and then has to say that please reverse this credit. None of the show cause notices does that, and that's where many of the high court decisions come in your favor to say that this is based on presumptions. The tax officer should have first exhausted his remedy against the vendor and then only come to me. There are at times notices which are internally conflicting. So at one paragraph, they would say something, another paragraph, they would say something totally different. And if we find such internally conflicting show cause notices, again, that would be a ground which should be raised as a possible challenge to a validity of the show cause notice. And finally, limitation. Of course, September was the first limitation period which exhausted itself in 73. Therefore, as of now, you may not have many show causes being invalid on the grounds of limitation. But as time progresses, you will find more and more show causes which become invalid on the ground of limitation. So this, I think, was from my side. And now maybe we can take up a few questions if there are any. I would hand it over to the chairman to take it ahead from here.
Thank you, Sunil ji. I think it was a wonderful session. So, सबसे पहले ना I want to share one learning which I learned while listening to your entire deliberation. How succinctly and very distinctly you have broken down the whole steps. So पहले आपने समझाया कि प्री एडजुडिकेशन क्या होता है, फिर एडजुडिकेशन कैसे होगा, फिर पोस्ट एडजुडिकेशन कैसे होगा, कैसे आपने हर चीजों का माइन्यूट डिटेल भी ध्यान रखा कि जैसे फॉर एग्जांपल कि भाई ग्लॉसरी कैसे देना, फॉन्ट साइज कैसे देना, हाउ डज इट मैटर, एंड देन यू टुक अस टू लिटिल थिंग्स कि भाई जब वो लोग आ रहे हैं इंस्पेक्शन पे या आप जब रिप्लाई दे रहे हो तो आपको प्री एससीएन स्टेज पे माने यू शुड नॉट ओपन ऑल योर कार्ड्स एक्सेट्रा एक्सेट्रा. सो sir, I will start by asking my questions and then maybe I can take up other questions. Sir, at various stages of communication, I would not say really notice, but communication, department omits to give DIN. जैसे हमारे केस में हुआ कि प्री एससीएन इशू हुआ बट उस पर कोई DIN नंबर नहीं था, and then they issued SCN with DIN number. Sir, is it possible for us to take a plea ki since pre-SCN does not have DIN or any previous communication did not have DIN, the whole process is invalid and not correct in law because the starting point itself did not meet the criteria? Can we take that or no? They can get away with that.
So, very interesting point, Rohitji, and I think it's important to understand this concept from the sentence which you started with in your preamble. To say that the show cause notice is the foundation. Any document prior to the show cause notice is not the foundation. It might be an invalid document because the CBC instruction is that every document should contain a DIN. Let it be a show cause or let it be a non-show cause. So yes, DRC 1A not containing a DIN number would make DRC 1A an invalid document. But just because DRC 1A is an invalid document will not make DRC 1 an invalid document.
Okay.
And you are aware that in the initial period, the rules required a DRC 1A mandatorily.
Correct.
And thereafter, there was an amendment in the law. Earlier, they had used the word shall issue an intimation in DRC 1A. But thereafter, that shall has been replaced by may.
May, correct.
And therefore, today, the officer might say, okay, I could have straight away issued you a DRC 1. Therefore, invalidity of DRC 1A will not help you. Earlier period, had it been shall, it would have helped you because if DRC 1A was invalid, then the DRC 1 also becomes invalid if DRC 1A was mandatory.
Okay.
Today, it is not mandatory. So that's a bit of a difference which will come up in the response.
Which will come. Okay, fair enough. So now we have, sir, some other questions in the chat box.
Sure.
So I'll take them one by one. Sir, one question asked by Ms. Preeti Singh. Whether proper officer has the power to ask for soft copy of the original data of software used for recording businesses. Let's say Tally, largely SMEs Tally use करते हैं, तो can they ask for a backup of Tally, etc. In form, ADT 01 under Section 65? Are they well within their rights to ask for a soft copy of the software, मतलब backup of the software that you're using?
Yeah.
Do they have the powers?
Yeah, so this again happens very frequently, but according to me, they do not have that type of a power. You can definitely, especially this is an ADT proceedings. So in an audit proceedings, they are expected to review your books of accounts. Now there's a difference between books of accounts and the database. We need to understand that difference well. Yeah, you might be maintaining books of accounts in a soft format, but that is different from a database. So definitely he can ask you for a sales register, and you may choose to give either a printout of a sales register, or you may give it in a PDF format or an Excel format, and that he can ask you. He can still ask you, okay 10,000 lines है, तो मुझे एक्सेल में मैचिंग करना है, तो आप मुझे आईटीसी रजिस्टर सॉफ्ट कॉपी में दे दो. Up to that I can understand, because ITC register is a book and he can ask for that book, but he cannot ask for the Tally backup. He can ask for limited items from the Tally backup. I hope I am able to explain the difference between the two. You are
my follow-up question on this,
हाँ.
Preeti Singh. सर, एक हम लोग ना क्लाइंट के लिए ऑडिट कर रहे थे, डिपार्टमेंट को हेल्प कर रहे थे इन टर्म्स ऑफ व्हाटएवर दे वर आस्किंग फॉर द डेटा.
Okay.
With my experience, I would like your opinion on this for the benefit of larger members. So to what extent can they go in asking data? For example, we were getting done audit done of educational institute. So they're asking data for all students who have taken admission. Give me each and every student's name, address. I will call them up and ask if, on sample basis, if they've actually registered in your organization. You give me details of all the courses that you have run for the past 3 years. So what is the extent of scrutiny can they go under, or is there a boundary?
So if you ask for a pure legal answer, there may not be a very clear legal answer to this, but there are some practical thoughts on how to deal with these types of things. And this happens very commonly. And I can give you an example. Yesterday, I was discussing with one of the authorities regarding a financial institution, a bank, which has 95% of revenue from interest income and 5% which is exempted. And the officer says, now I want you to give me interest income vis-a-vis the loans given. So make a table, name of the person, loan given, interest received. Now, naturally, you can understand that in a complex organization, this can be very difficult, just like your example of students and fees given by each student. Naturally, this will have to be dealt with. So what we did was we explained him that, look, these are our audit processes. We will give you the types of the activities which we carry out. So coming back to your example, I don't think you should shy away from giving the course outlines.
Yes.
Right? Because your exemption is based on the course. So you should definitely give him all the courses which you conduct, and why do you believe that they are exempted under that entry? Up to that level, we should give them. And then course level aggregate revenue. If he pushes beyond it, maybe a couple of transactions in each of the course levels as samples can be given.
Sample.
Yes. But that much we should give. And thereafter, if he requests for more, many a times with a little bit of practical discussions, they would understand that, yes, this is nothing but just a nuisance value. End of the day, they are not going to get any revenue out of it. If he wants to conclude a course is taxable or not, he could conclude based on 2 representative documents also.
Sir, I will take another question of a gentleman.
Mm-hmm.
He says that whether proper officer has the 1 minute. Sir, if on show cause notice, proper signatures of proper officer are not there, whether that show cause notice is valid?
Yeah, this is a big problem. If the notice is not signed, it is not valid. That could be one of the arguments, but we see that in many cases they do sign. At least in our part of the place, we are seeing that they are all signed properly. But if they are not signed, most of them come with a digital signature nowadays. If they are not signed, definitely it's a valid ground. An unsigned notice is as good as no notice.
Okay. I request all the people present here, if you have any question, please put it in the chat box and I can take them one by one with Sunil sir. In the meantime, for the benefit of larger audience, I'll keep on asking my questions so that, that experience can be shared. Sunil sir, you're aware that, 30th September was the last date for show cause notice for 1780 and 31st December is the last date for 1890.
Yes.
Now, during the course of investigation, a lot of data has been collected, but because of paucity of time at the table of the officer, he is facing a limitation period of 31st December. Now, we can see during the course of deliberation with the officer that he is not doing proper investigation. I'll give you an example. Sir, there was a merger issue where one company, transferor company, got merged with transferee company. However, there was a transition period. So there is always a transition period where there is a high court order and the effect is given in GST INS 02. Now, during that transition period, the bills have come into the name of transferor company and ultimately got merged into transferee company. Now, he was investigating, we gave him all the bills, we gave him the high court order. Now, suddenly he is facing a limitation period of 31st December. So, without doing the entire investigation, he says that I will pass a show cause notice. Sir, how do we deal with these kind of situations where the officer, without completing, and how would we record that legally before, so that it goes up the higher authorities that the proper fact-finding exercise has not been done?
Yes. So there are two approaches to this. If a practical and a pragmatic approach would be to chip in and help the officer in deriving the correct facts. At times, maybe it may not be our prerogative to calculate all the data and things like that. But if we are strong enough in our data, we should assist him in giving the correct data so that he can prepare a proper show cause notice. If that doesn't happen and he issues a show cause notice with some erroneous data, your reply to the show cause notice should definitely contain the correct data. And if it is only quantification, the show cause will be valid, but the data amounts will get reduced. But if he makes some conceptual errors, then it can be a challenge to the show cause itself. It then presents an opportunity to you to say that the entire show cause itself is void ab initio.
Fair enough. Now we have certain set of questions. I'll just take it one by one. Sir, whether interest under Section 50 can be recovered directly without issuance of show cause notice under Section 73 or 74?
Yeah, interest is a big issue. Interest by itself cannot be recovered without 73, 74 notice. I think there is already a couple of decisions on this point, both under the old law as well as under the new law. The challenge which comes here is the show cause notice can be issued only if tax is unpaid. So, traditionally, excise, service tax, and which also the central tax authorities do in GST is, even though you might have paid the tax but not paid interest, they will treat that tax as a deposit. They will demand the tax. They will seek appropriation of the tax and then demand interest and penalty. And that would be the right way to do it. Now, if a state tax officer, because state tax officers have not been exposed to this adjudication process, at times state tax officers straight away issue a notice demanding interest and penalty. That would clearly be an incorrect show cause notice and it would be struck down. If there is no tax payable, there cannot be interest or penalty.
Correct. Sir, another question on interest is that, sir, there is a notice issued for recovery of interest under Section 73, let's say for the period 17-18. And it is time barred because by 30th September, no show cause notice was issued. So the department resorted to Section 74 to issue the show cause notice. Default in payment of interest in 3B, can it be clubbed under willful misstatement and therefore section 74 can be invoked?
I would not think so.
So you
Because
would think that it is still time barred.
it is time barred. Because there has to be an intent to evade tax.
Okay.
74 uses intent to evade tax. It doesn't use intent to evade interest.
Intent to evade interest. Okay. Sir, another question is that, somebody has not filed annual return for 17, 18 and 18, 19. Now, whether this issue of show cause notice will fall under section 73 or 74 for the financial year 17, 18.
So I
Can they
assume
say
he was
that?
required to file because there were set of entities who were exempted from filing return.
Yes, correct.
So
They were
assuming
required to
he is
file.
required to file the return and he has not filed. If he is required to file and he is not filed, then it is easier for the department to allege 74.
Sir, but if 3B and 1 is filed regularly for 12 months,
But
only
return, annual return
not
is
filed.
also a return.
Correct. It is also a return.
It is
Okay.
also
So
defined to
then,
be a return.
correct. So then they have the power to resort to section 74 and
74.
go even beyond the.
Yes.
Correct. Sir, another question was whether serving of notice by mail is a valid notice. Yes, by a registered email ID or on your login ID, it is a valid notice. So I'm answering this on your behalf. Even if your office is closed and the notice is pasted on the wall next to your gate of the office, that is also a valid notice. So
Let me
I'm
just add a little bit
Yeah.
onto this, because there has
Sure.
been a lot of confusion on this front. So if you refer the GST law, it says that the primary mode of communication of a notice is through the common portal. Therefore, first thing is that the notice has to be there on your portal. If the notice is not there on the portal, nothing else would salvage that situation.
Correct.
If the notice is on the portal, then everything else is secondary. Your emails, coming by email, issuing by a physical, these are notice. Many times they issue a physical print and send it to you. So all of that is secondary. The primary onus is on the department to put it on the portal.
Okay. Sir, so what you're saying is if it is not on the portal but sent on the registered mail ID, it will be invalid
Yes.
delivery of notice because it's not on the portal.
Yes.
Okay.
There have been decisions to this effect also. In fact, in many of our cases, they issue a physical notice or an email notice. When we reply to that and we raise this as a technical objection, then they go ahead and raise it on the common portal.
Okay. Okay. Great. That is a great insight. I think, somebody should take note. Even if it is given on email or registered on your, pasted on your office wall, it will still be invalid unless and until you find that notice in the portal.
Yes.
So that's a great insight. Sir, there's one gentleman called Somkant Kushava who's written that, what are the remedies available to an SSC if the GST was cancelled suo moto for failure to file return with retrospective effect, and the SSC is not aware of it, and more than 6 months have already passed after cancellation. I think, I would like to ask Somnath, are you referring to your vendor filing registration getting cancelled or your own registration getting cancelled? If, Somnath is there, you can just, clarify whether you're referring to your own registration or to your vendor registration. Sir, client part. Somnath, client part is all right, but whether, client's own registration or client's vendor registration. So assuming it is client, I think you should have known your registration is cancelled because you would be filing the return every month. And once the registration is cancelled, you will not be able to file return. Sir,
So I think
any
the only
views on
option is
this?
today we are now having that amnesty. So he'll have to file an appeal against the cancellation and get the cancellation order nullified
Revoked.
and file the returns. It's not a very happy situation, but that's the only recourse which he would have perhaps.
Okay. Okay. Great. Anybody else having any other question? I think we can take a couple of questions more if anybody has any questions. So in the meantime, if somebody writes questions, one fact that I would like to bring to your notice is that, I was doing a M&A deal, and, evaluation and term sheet was signed.
Okay.
Due diligence was done, and we were about to enter into a share purchase agreement
Sure.
when the acquiring company received a GST notice. And, the whole, share purchase agreement was stopped because the amount was very huge, and it was a scrutiny notice, basically reconciliation part. So just to bring on point that, how notices are very important and how rampant notices are issued. So I have seen notices worth 200 crores also, and I have seen notices worth 20 rupees also. That's what has happened in the stage.
Mhm.
So, sir, a better way to probably deal with or send notices, etc. Because lot depends today on lot of M&A deals, and even replying to a 20 rupees show cause notice, because it's an automatic generated notices. So, any thoughts on whether government should change the procedure or?
So basically, there are two thoughts here. One is, of course, the government wants to automate the process as much as possible because they themselves don't trust their tax officers. So they want to automate it. Now, when you are automating the process, naturally the computers, either we can bring in materiality limit. Now, in a diverse country like India, it may be difficult for the government to bring in a materiality limit for notices. And if they put it, they might put it 20, 100, 200, which is going to be very insignificant type of a number. But they can't say that, okay, any amount below 1 lakh, we will not issue a notice. Because while for a city like Calcutta, 1 lakh may be small, but there will be so many small towns where 1 lakh would be important. So therefore, in the absence of a materiality limit, you will face these challenges, computers issuing notices. We've seen notices for 2 rupees also.
Yes.
So that materiality factor is very much there, and I don't think there's much we can do about it. The second challenge which we see many times is duplication. So we had one example where an ASMT 10 was issued for 2A 3B mismatch. We replied to that. Before that ASMT is taken care of, simultaneously audit is happening. So in the audit process also, he wants to do the same thing. We told him that we already replied to the ASMT 10. So he says, okay, then you give me that data, but I will treat it in audit. I will drop ASMT 10. Now, he's casually said this, that he will drop ASMT 10. But if he drops ASMT 10, then he can't take it in audit.
Audit, correct.
So these types of challenges we are facing, and I think it's as time progresses, because in a zeal to have multiple modes of reaching towards a show cause notice, we have somewhere, the law itself has created a lot of overlap.
Correct.
Which sometimes works against us, sometimes works in our favor.
Well, so, sir, we have a couple of more questions. I think we'll take that and then we'll call it a day. So, one, Mr. Ankit Jain has asked a question, sir, ki department raised interest issue under Section 73, and when we submitted that, your show cause notice is time barred. They issued similar show cause notice for similar value and similar ground under Section 74, now adding the point of, fraud and misrepresentation under Section 74. So,
very interesting.
Is department allowed to do that?
So once the notice is issued under 73, it cannot go, the same point cannot go in 74. So on day one, you said that there is no separation. And on day two, you suddenly say that for the same facts, there is a separation. Clearly, the second notice is incorrect. First notice was incorrect because there was no separation, and it was issued under 73 and therefore time barred. Second notice is incorrect because he couldn't have alleged separation, having already accepted that there is no separation. So both the notices are incorrect. In fact, we had a very interesting situation where there was a DRC 1A which was proposed under 73. And then DRC 1 started under 74 because they realized that we want penalties. Not because it was time barred, but because they want penalties. So our response is that the concept of fraud separation was not there in DRC 1A, so it cannot come in DRC 1.
So this is very interesting thought. I think great learning here. Sir, another question is key, like you said, if audit under Section 65 is over, uh, the audit has been taken care of, and replies have been made, demands have been paid. Still, whether for the same period, an ASMT 10 can be issued again.
No, once ADT 1 has started, I would not say even ADT 2. Once an intimation for audit under ADT 01 has been issued to you, ASMT 10 process has no role. Because that aspect is one facet of the audit, and therefore it subsumes within the audit. Then the scrutiny has no role.
Correct. Fair enough. So, sir, last question we'll take. I think somebody is saying that bank account was provisionally attached by department for 5 lakh rupees 3 years ago, and GST has been closed. How to proceed in this case? So, as I understand, probably the registration has been closed and the attachment still prevails for 5 lakh rupees. So, how this has to be closed? So, I mean, before even I give this question to Sunil sir, I have to ask him, what is the status of that litigation? They have attached provisionally. Have we gone to appeal? Have we filed a reply? Mr. Kumar, if you can enlighten, what is the stage of litigation?
So I would believe that there's a time limit of 1 year for a provisional attachment. So I think he'll have to use his recourses and approach the High Court. Immediately the High Court would, unfreeze the bank account, because there's a time limit of 1 year for provisional attachment, I understand.
But again, he's not saying provisional attachment. Okay, fair enough. So I think no appeal was filed, but still, if it was attached and if the liability has crystallized, they'll take the liability, but still release the bank account.
Yes.
Which is fine. So I think, sir, are you in the mood to take more questions, or should we call it a day?
I think it's okay. I mean, we have completed more the questions, right? Or
Yeah.
or
Okay.
more I can take. Otherwise, it's okay. I think we can close a bit early. It's a Saturday evening.
Okay. Yeah. So fair enough. I think we'll call it a day. So from my side, Sunil sir, it's been lovely and honoring chairing the session with you, and hoping to listen to you more soon and meeting you in person.
Sure.
So that my learning curve can go on. I would pass the baton to Sakshi again. Sakshi, if you're there, or
Rohit sir, I'll be taking over. Rohit sir, I'll be taking over. Sakshi is not there.
Okay, yeah. Okay, Manish.
And
so if you can just give vote of thanks and closing remarks.
Absolutely, sir. It will be my pleasure. And thank you, Sunil sir. And thank you, Rohit sir, first of all. Before proceeding to give a formal vote of thanks, I must tell you it was an enlightening experience hearing from you, sir. So it is my privilege to give you a formal vote of thanks. First of all, thank you very much, Sunil sir, for enlightening us, for taking time out of your busy schedule and speaking so detailed way, in a detailed way on every topic that we can understand very clearly. Rohit sir, it was also a pleasure. I'll also like to thank you to be agreeing to be the chair of the session and coordinating the session. And last but not the least, I'll like to thank all the participants without whom this session would not have been successful. Before calling it a day, I will also remind the session, the participants, that this marathon continues tomorrow, where I will be joining you as a co-host on a fresh topic, that is issues in ITC and show cause notices related to it. That is tomorrow from 4 to 6. Let's all join us and continue this marathon session. Thank you, Sunil sir. Thank you, Rohit sir. I'm calling it a day, and good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.